my pretties. This is the different cup of video that I want to, talk about because not many people really noticed this, anybody making any episodes regarding this. But today, I'm the Lion Queen. I'm going to be talking about this one episode of Arthur that is the most darkest episode of Arthur. I mean, Arthur had tackled subjects such as misinformation online, banned books. I remember, I think they did tackle the George Floyd incident at one point, as well as they also did a episode regarding, well, gay rights and that. I mean, Arthur has been a show that's been around since the 90s, and they have done a lot of, you know, the fact that they've done a lot of these episodes tackling serious subject matters. Now, however, though, there is one episode that stood out to me that always will stick with me for pretty much a long time. And most of you guys probably remember I did talk about mention Arthur a few times. Today I am going to be talking about this one episode of Arthur called April 9th. Now, before I begin, I want to say not a lot of people have actually covered this topic of Arthur. But however, I want to give a big shout out to the channel called Seasons, who happened to made a video going more in the depth of it, which of course it unfortunately got blocked worldwide a few times. So I'll say right now that go subscribe to this person called Seasons. He's the one that made the Arthur episode, going more in the depth of, well, the Arthur episode that is the most darkest one. Now, this episode, April 9th, is a episode from, well, season 7, and it's, well, yeah, season 7, and it's a 10th episode of it. Now, however, lots of people don't know about this episode. Well, most of you guys who have been, who have pretty much, seen this episode if you were a kid. Most of you guys probably remembered if you were a kid, you probably remember seeing this episode. Now, before I get started, I'm going to be pretty honest right here is this episode takes place a year prior after the September 11th life tragic event. This happens at least a year after that happened. This episode was released. So, however, though, this is honestly one of the most darkest episode of Arthur I have ever seen. And honestly, I have seen it a bunch of times, and this episode having to be the one of the most darkest one ever since I was a kid. Now, basically in this episode, it is a response to the September 11th attacks, which most of you guys know what that is. The story was of this episode was pretty much designed to show how people dealt with tragedies in different ways, and at times where it can be big impact on us. So, I mean, there's like different characters, that are in this that has dealt with this for a while. Now, basically, April 9th is an episode that has been made of Arthur. It was released in 2002 in the US and then 2003 in, well, Canada. This is basically to teach us about tragedies and how it can have a big impact on, well, on our, on ourselves and people and etc. However, the fire was caused by some faulty wiring that destroys the teacher's lounge, and it pretty much forces Lakewood Elementary School to close promptly due to a range of reactions from the kids, which of course we do have, you know, a lot of the subplots of this involves Arthur, Buster, Binky, and Sue Ellen, which I will be getting to those in a bit. So pretty much what happens in the episode April 9th, basically what happens is, well, Mr. Rapper and his class are sitting down in the classroom and they're starting to get beginning with their, well, lesson until the fire alarm goes off and everyone starts to smell smoke. However, for though everyone when all evacuates the school, there's no towers falling or anything like that. they're using the school fire as a way to show how tragedies can really have an impact on everybody's lives. I mean, I was originally going to save this for September, but I thought I should talk about this episode because there is literally, which I do apologize for that. I just had to pause because my mom knocked for something. So, what I am saying is that this episode is to show us how tragedies can affect everybody else, and everyone affects the tragedies very differently. Like, I mean, if you've watched Arthur for as long as I have, since I was a kid, you probably know how much tragedies can really affect people. So on April 9th, pretty much everybody has, well, a lot of issues that I have to be going through of these tragedies in life. So eventually, the students have had to wait until Lakewood Elementary School is being done, rebuilt, and renovated. The students will be attending the Mighty Mountain Elementary School, and everybody else, however, for they always had a really grip and fear in, well, when it comes to these tragedies that happen. Now, we do have a subplot, which I'm going to talk about our first subplot. However, Arthur Fur, however, has a subplot that's the least relevant, but basically what happens is, Arthur, Mr. Reed, who happens to be David Reed, was at the school on a catering job, escaped safely when the fire happened, but of course, before he got out, Arthur is evacuated out of the school, but he's worried about his dad. The fire chief refuses to let him inside during the school because it's too dangerous. Eventually, Arthur is relieved to see his dad made it out okay thanks to the firefighters and everything that had cleared up. So eventually, Arthur was so glad his dad was alive. But ever since then, and every time Arthur's, dad leaves the house, he is just really concerned that his dad may not come back one day. I mean, that honestly triggers a bit in Arthur, having him have a bit of anxiety because of that. So eventually, he even tries to fake sick at one point just to try to get Arthur's dad to stay home. Eventually, Arthur explains to Arth to him, well, David explains that to Arthur that, when he was around Arthur's age, Grandma Fora was in a car accident, although she wasn't hurt. But he feared for a long time that whenever his mom got into the car for whatever, she would have another accident. So he has some coping mechanisms to help keep himself feel better. David would crumple up a pieces of paper and throw them into a wastebasket, deciding that if he could successfully make more shots than he missed, Fora would come home safely. However, one day, when David forgot to do it, Grafora ended up being gone for 3 hours, but ultimately returned home just fine. And that's when David, or Mr. Reed, explains to Arthur that it's his job to worry about the son and not the other way around. Although he does understand his, understandable and the way why this is going on. So, of course, Arthur finds out that David has returned home, or or his dad returns home from the catering the Crosswire's birthday party, safe and sound. That's when pretty much how Arthur manages to get through the trauma, recover from it, and learn from the experience. Now, I could definitely say, I mean, a lot of people during the September 11th incident, lots of lives were lost, including families, moms, dads, etc. And a lot of people really are still sad to this day, even though it's been about almost 22 years now. So there's definitely that. Sue Ellen, which is another character, she was a minor character in Arthur. However, in this episode, she definitely was one of those characters. I mean, she's a minor character in Arthur, but she does play a role in this one. Basically, she gets a postcard from her friend in Bolivia, and she has her precious journal where she explains a lot of stuff, what's going on. However, when Sue Ellen was evacuated in the school, she left her backpack behind with her journal. Unfortunately, she had no time to retrieve it for her. So, however, though, she cries at the loss of her journal as the fireman sprays some on the burning objects, including her backpack, because, well, her backpack was unfortunately, well, destroyed by the fire. Yeah. So, basically, during the episode, after being evacuated, Muffy tries to replace, well, Sue Ellen's journal just to try to, pretty much replace her journal. So eventually more going on. She's just, going through trauma of the loss of her journal, and of course Muffy was trying to help, but Muffy didn't really understand how how much trauma that Sue Ellen went through when her journal was destroyed because, well, this was Sue Ellen going through that trauma. Eventually, though, later on in the episode, Sue Ellen writes in her journal that hearing it in 1 month since September 9th, well, April 9th. Although she doesn't want to experience another fire, she's just glad her friends have made it through the situation and feels happy knowing that if they stuck together, they can get through just about anything. The only one piece of evidence of her old journal was only available and was only on the front was the llama burnt from the postcard. That was all was left from the September 9th and April 9th. Why did I keep saying September? I don't even know why, because this episode reminds me of the September incident. So that is kind of why I'm saying it more often. So Sue Ellen goes through her own trauma of the loss of her journal where she kept everything. I mean, if any of my stuff get burned in the fire, sure, I'd feel really upset. Although Buster, however, feels really left out about the whole thing because, well, if you see in the episode, he eventually, overslept as he didn't hear his alarm go off. But when he gets to the school pretty much still there. But of course, when Buster finally arrived, Francine explains what happened. Buster feels dismayed that he slept through the entire thing, which was pretty much the biggest event ever. And eventually, he didn't really understand most of the time. But of course, first Buster discusses his conflict feelings with his mom, because who gets an idea to do something the next day, because Buster was just unsure of how to feel because he missed a fire. Eventually, though Buster goes to visit the janitor, Mr. Morris, in the hospital when Mr. Morris ends up hurting his leg during the fire. Because if you see the fire and the flames in the school, Mr. Morris closed the door to the teachers' lounge, and that's how I don't know how what happened. How Mr. Morrison broke his foot or something, but something fell on his foot and had injured his leg, and he'd been taken to the hospital. With Buster, on the other hand, he starts comforting Mr. Morris and even started, doing a friendship because they both have some things in common, to which it was interesting. So eventually, though, later on, when the school was evacuated, Buster overhears that it was just a false alarm, although Buster was disappointed and has been the only one who never went through a fire. Although Arthur points out that it was actually good luck. But that was just that. I mean, Buster visits Mr. Morris, who tells him about the time he worked as a dog groomer, and one time all the dogs ran to a perfect circle in the cornfield. So Mr. Morrison thinks it was caused by aliens, just like Buster. And of course, that's when more things going on. Eventually, though, near the end of the episode, it is revealed that, we do know that Mr. Morrison, who is going to be explaining to Buster that he's moving in with his daughter who lives in New Mexico in a ranch. But of course, Buster offers to let Mr. Morris live with him and his mom because, Buster's dad and his mom divorced, which happens to be the Fury in Arthur, since we never saw his dad. Although it's not really quite explained if that's actually the case or not. But I like to think that Buster's parents did have a divorce. Mr. Morris, although certainly touched by the offer, feel that it would be best to live with his family, but he gives Buster his old accordion as a present to remember him by, also assuring Buster that he can visit any time. So eventually, Buster does not know too much about, well, he's all bummed out because he didn't experience the fire like everyone else did. But I definitely have to say that Buster honestly Lee was, kind of confused about why he didn't experience certain things, how everyone feels. I mean, Buster's just a mixed feelings, while Arthur's worried about his dad, and Sue Ellen is just upset that her journal got destroyed in the fire. I mean, I remember honestly seeing this episode when I was a kid, and honestly, it really scared me. Like, not scared me totally, but I was really nervous and kind of like, I don't know, freaked out a little bit because the episode tackling, a fire, really hoping that that never happens to my school when I went there, and thankfully it hasn't, so that is good luck, honestly. So, Binky, however, is probably the most, well, ongoing of this because basically, pretty much in the episode when the school was evacuating, Binky catches a glimpse of, well, the fire in the teacher's lounge, making him very nervous. So eventually, Binky ends up saying that he saw the flames and tries not to be scared. Well, here's here's the thing, because we all know Binky is like the big tough big bully in the school, and he's afraid of fire. I mean, this honestly really makes him, he's trying to hide the fear because he doesn't want to be a complete chicken over it. However, though, while watching Bionic Bunny and he sees, a villain have fire on their head or whatever, that's when Binky ends up starting to panic and get scared because he's afraid of the fire and he suffers some PTSD. So Binky eventually was found out that he pulled the fire alarm when he gets in big trouble when, well, the fire chief and the mighty mountain principal sees this, and they ended up looking at what's going on. Now, eventually, Binky writes a confession apology letter to the Mighty Mountain principal and Mr. Hanley, which, of course, he refuses to tell the true reason why he pulled the fire alarm. That's when Mr. Haney punishes Binky by making him doing community service with Mr. Frensky, aka Francine's dad, supervising by picking up the litter at the park. So while working, a group of firefighters go by, and it turns out they knew Mr. Frensky, as he used to be a volunteer firefighter. Of course, that's when Francine's dad admits that he was being scared around fires, like the ones that happen in Lakewood, can be pretty scary. Of course, when Binky comes back to school after everybody, well, goes back to school, well, when it reopened, though that is when Binky goes walk down to school and then hallucinates smoke in the new principal's office. He runs out in terror as it worries him. Eventually, he tells to Mr. Frensky that he was having fears of the fire and how he's too scared to go back to school because he keeps seeing flames of smoke, etc. So Mr. Frensky understands Binky's feelings, revealed that he had similar problems when he saw his first fire close up. So when Mr. Frensky explains that talking about it made him feel better, Binky agrees that he should do a little same. So he talks to Miss. So he basically eventually goes back later on, and he eventually gets some going on with what is happening. He basically feels a lot better dur, about talking about his fear. Now, honestly, this episode is a pretty good one because it honestly explains what actually happened when it came to, well, certain tragedies and how everyone feels about them and how everyone, goes through different stuff when it came to that. Now, honestly, when I first watched Arthur, this was one of the most upsetting but not really so tragedy episodes, but it definitely was a bit of a tragic episode, as well as, well, some, it's pretty much just an episode that really can have you an emotional mixed experiences. With Binky having PTSD because he's scared of fire, Buster, missing out on the whole thing and he, wished he hadn't. Arthur worrying about his dad not coming back if he were to pass away due to a tragedy, Sue Ellen losing her journal. This whole episode basically involves everyone dealing with certain subjects. And eventually, this is definitely one episode that really had me on edge of my seat when I was watching this. Because back when I was younger, it honestly, I didn't really understand too much about it when I was younger. But when I got when I got older, though, I started to learn to understand a lot more as to what went down. Now, honestly, this episode, I'm really glad that this existed when I was a kid. And I'm so glad I got to see it on TV. I do remember a lot of people, after they see this episode, were very, mixed in on, well, the event and unsure of what to say or do, or, how they actually feel. I mean, this episode is a really, really hard to, talk about certain things. But in this episode, though, it does portray September 11th in a really good way that kids will understand. I mean, I didn't really understand too much of it at the time when I was younger, but as I got older, I started to learn much more and got much more better at this. So it's still a pretty good episode, although it is very good episode on teaching kids about how tragedies can affect everyone else. I mean, not everybody's perfect, but I definitely gotta say it is a really great episode involving that, especially for a show that ran from 1996 to 2022. Honestly, this episode definitely tackled the subject matter really well. Now, if you have not seen this episode of Arthur, I highly recommend you check this episode out. I mean, I'm sure most of us have seen this episode of Arthur. I have never met anybody who's never seen this episode. And if you happen to have seen this episode, then you guys can let me know how you feel about it in the comments below, because I personally would like to hear it. So, anyways, with that being said, if I'm missing anything about this episode, April 9th, please let me know what it is in the comments below if I'm missing anything. So I do want to say right now, and I want to get this message out there, whatever you're going through, it's okay to not be okay, depending on the situation, depending on what trauma you're feeling, etc. But I can really relate to this episode with the September 11th attacks in many ways that I can possibly count. Well, I guess that's pretty much all I have to say, but like I said, if I'm missing something, let me know what it is in the comments below. So, as always, I'm going to sit here and say this right now, that this is just me explaining, about this dark episode of Arthur. And I want to give a big shout out to this user who made an episode regarding him talking more depth about Arthur's darkest episode, which is called Seasons. So, I want to give a big shout out to Seasons for, well, making this episode of Arthur. Well, not making it, but making a video of talking about this episode that is the most darkest one. So, anyways, I guess that's just all I have to really say. So, if I'm missing anything, let me know what it is in the comments below. So, like I said before, and like I always say, this is just simply my own personal opinion. If you disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these episodes. And as always, I'm going to sit here and say right now, I personally am glad that this episode existed when I was a kid, because it really has a lot of a big message going out there as a response to well, the September 11th incident. So, anyways, that's just all I have to say. Yeah, let me know if I'm missing anything in the comments below. As always, I'm the Lion Queen. I want to thank you so much for watching today's video. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, I want you guys to all go follow me on my Twitter account. Go follow me on DeviantArt as well if you are interested in following those two channels. Links to those will be in the About page section. As always, be sure to go subscribe to my backup channel known as Miss Dark Shigo, so you guys will be able to go follow my backup channel So if you have not subbed to it yet, be sure you do so. So as always, I'm going to sit here and just say right now that, yeah, as always, I want to thank you so much for watching. And as always, roll the outro because I'm out of here. And as always, I'll see you all next time.